So I was raised Catholic. Important to say I was baptized Catholic, raised in a Catholic family. But toward the end of my elementary years, our church started floating away from practicing their faith, which had a strong impact on me. And I was still searching for some faith. So that by my junior year of high school, I was gathering around other kids of faith, but they were of different faiths. And I remember very much working with one of my friends. I was trying to convince him to be Catholic, and he was trying to actually, quote, get me saved. And he had more content than I did, and he won. He took me to a Billy Graham crusade of some nature, and at the end I realized he was going forward so that I could come forward and receive Christ as my personal Lord and Savior, which I thought that he was, but according to some new vernacular at the time, he wasn't. And so I basically proceeded forward with a lot of Protestant direction and eventually went into the Protestant evangelical ministry as a Southern Baptist minister. My mom was Catholic and my dad was not. My dad thought, though, that I was going through a phase, and my mom was very sad at my leaving the church, which I deeply understand at this point now in my life, of how difficult that was for the family. I was the only one at that point who had left and gone into Protestantism at that point. So eventually, when I did come back to the church, there was a strong welcome home by my family also, definitely. I was the first one that actively left, and I would say overtly, obviously, I rejected the church at that point. It was very strong in some of the ministries here locally. Nationally in the United States, my ministry was in East Los Angeles, working with gangs, helping them come out of their gangs and bring them to salvation through Christ, and mostly ministering with Catholics to get them saved, because as Catholics, you weren't necessarily going to heaven, according to some of the teachings that I was involved in. I was strongly steeped and taught that Catholics were not Christians. They were not of the Judeo-Christian sect, that they were actually members of a cult because they were not involved in what we know now is called sola scriptura. They weren't Bible-only people because they supported tradition. And it was, so Bible only was very deep a part of what my education was and the ministries that I was involved in that supported. And I remember one time being down in Monterrey, Mexico, and I was the translator for a church service, and the preacher was preaching sort of a very hellfire and brimstone sermon to the population. And I was the translator, fluent in Spanish, and I was to be translating his message to all these Catholics. And it was very evident in the cathedral on every corner, almost a church, that these were Catholics trying to get saved. And as he preached that because they were Catholic, they were going to hell, I felt a conviction that I could not translate those words to the crowd. And I found myself modifying his sermon in Spanish. And at the end realizing something's going on inside of me that's not comfortable with this style of gospel message. There were several stories that happened along the way that kept confirming, Randy, you're involved in a journey. You're involved in, the word journey comes from the same word as mystery. You're involved in something that's mysterious and it's good. There's something here of God. Keep pursuing it. In my studies before entering the church, I worked with a client who was Catholic, and he told me that the body and blood were the result of the host and the wine, that something called transubstantiation had happened. I knew he was incorrect because I had a Catholic background also. So that's another time I sought out a priest, still local in this parish, in this diocese, sought out a priest, met with him saying, so Father, I'm here to discuss theology. This client of mine told me that the bread and the wine actually turn into the body and blood of Christ, but that's not correct, is it? He said, no, Randy, that is correct, they do. And he said, no. I said, but Randy, aren't you actually here for you? And I said, no, with just a straight face. And at that moment I thought, oh my, I just lied to a priest. I am here for me, I just don't know how to tell him. And he actually became a very deep mentor of mine during that journey of helping me come back into the church. He's the one that gave me permission. We will receive you, Randy, when you come back. and I needed to hear that from him. Many of my family members, including my parents, were there to celebrate with us, with communion, with Eucharist. And as it turned out, that turned in, so for my mom to be that happy to see us come back into the church, and 2 weeks later she passed, she died. So our first Eucharist in the church was her last Eucharist in life. And that's of God. That was of God's timing. I knew that professionally that was going to be a leap of faith for me also, because of the work that I do. I worked at the time with a strong Protestant population, that I was known as a Protestant counselor, and I knew that stepping over to Catholicism would not be a popular move, and it was not a popular move, and it was a leap of faith, and a very survivable leap. Leaps of faith are survivable. And in fact, life flourished from that point.